get our class kicked off by reading just a few passages. You might gather what this class will be about after these passages, but it's in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and all the creatures that live along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. He goes on to say, as a consequence of that, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you, for speaking to mankind, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree that has fruit with the seed in it. They will be yours for your food. To all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and all the creatures that live along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food," and it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Of course, it was evening, and there was morning the sixth day. So, beautiful passage. I guess if you've been around the Christian faith very long, you might have read that a dozen times, or maybe 200 times. I mean, so we, if you're like me, like, you don't finish things when you start, you probably read Genesis 1 like, 1,000 times.
One day, I'll get this right. I want to just contrast something just for a minute, and you don't have to be familiar with this at all to get the point. But does anybody know any parallel ancient creation stories that are not from the Judeo-Christian worldview? Do anybody recall those? I jotted just something down last night. Just anybody at all? Yeah, that's one of them. That's the one I have, actually. And so this is this Mesopotamia origin story. It was a kind of a cosmic battle. And just to summarize it, it was the younger gods led by Marduk. They fought this primordial sea goddess. Marduk kills the sea goddess, splits her body in half, and fashions the heavens and the earth from her carcass. And the whole purpose of this creation story were the humans were created from the blood of a slain rebel god to relieve the gods of their menial labor. So the whole point was so we could be, well, I am on. Is my on? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it takes a team of people usually. I'm still getting signals. So the whole point of that was that provide the gods this manual labor, slave labor. The other one was this Babylonian. It was this lesser gods rebel against labor imposed by greater gods. Humans are created from clay mixed with the flesh and blood of a sacrifice god to do God's work. Once again, try to promote, just they'd be happy to do slave labor because that's what they were created to do. I mean, kind of let that sink in for a minute. I mean, and I read 6 or 7 of these from Egypt and other parts of Babylon, and it's got the same theme here. And you look at this creation story of what we believe in the Judeo-Christian worldview, the true God. And what's the purpose of creation? We just read just those few short verses in Genesis chapter 1. What's the purpose of this creation? Why did he do all this?
Honor him.
To honor him. And what do we receive from it? What was all that language is about? Of course, we're supposed to give glory and thanks to God for what he's done for us. But all this creation was for what? Was for our benefit. All the food, all the trees, all the seed-bearing things, the fish, the birds. And it says something interesting about creation and the things within it. We're supposed to rule over it and subdue it. So what does that mean? We don't think about ruling over things sometimes. That's not the language we typically use, but that's what the account says. So what does that mean to you? Well, we're supposed to rule over creation and subdue it. What does that mean?
I would think
you just mean take care of it?
Well, I think stewardship is a massive part of that. That's right. And we don't think of ruling sometime in that context, but I think that's the right notion. Anything, what about subduing creation? I'm not saying that's kind of when you subdue something, that's kind of a negative term sometime. I don't think it's negative here. Think about, and I think this ties into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what does it mean to be made in the image of God. I don't know of a more important topic than being made in God's image. I don't know of a better topic than this. It really does. You talk about defining a worldview, defining how we view God and view man. Man, this is it. And I know probably a crafty, great teacher would have like built something up and saved the punch to the end. I don't want to do that. I just want to talk about it right now, how critical this topic is, because I want to suggest something to you. When you think about all this what's messed up in this world of ours, there's a lot of great things, still a lot of great people. We're going to talk about that some. We've also got a lot of messes going on. And I would contend that much of it revolves around this idea that our society, West and East, have lost this concept that we were made very special in the image of God himself. When you get that fixed in your brain, man, you start treating God differently and people differently. And so we're going to dig into that, what that really means to be in the image of God. Just to save a question for a little bit later, let me kind of just state this quickly. I mean, I will tell you, the Bible doesn't tell you exactly what that means. I mean, it kind of leaves these implications and these inferences about what it means to be made in the image of God. So it doesn't give this textbook definition. It kind of challenges us to wrestle with it. So I don't know the exact answer of every nuance of it. It could mean a lot of different things. But here's what we know for sure what it means. I mean, because it's by definition. Think about the calling about what I'm about to say to you. We are supposed to image God. I mean, it is that simple. We're supposed to image God. That is like we are his representatives. That is, we represent God to the world. Man, if you don't let that kind of sink in for you, you can kind of fly over you. We are supposed to represent God to the world. I mean, when the world looks at us, it's supposed to be looking like some version of God in the mirror. And man, that's a big one. We were supposed to actually reimagine what God is when people look at us. Powerful, powerful thought. And I think we're going to have the perfect image of God that we were supposed to look at later on in the class. It really just tells us exactly how we're supposed to rule the world, what that means in biblical language, how we're supposed to subdue the world. We have a perfect representation of what that is in Jesus. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But just to flush that out a little bit, you think about the 10 Commandments. You know, early in the 10 Commandments, what does it state about? No other gods before me. And what is immediately after that? You're supposed to make no what? Remember? Do you remember this? No carved images. And think about, that's not just carved images make no carved images of some false god. You're not even supposed to make a carved image of the true God. And we know that like really well through the famous or maybe infamous golden calf story. I mean, do you remember what Aaron said there? It's peer pressure. Moses has gone to the mountain. Where's Moses? We know the story super well. And so he fashions this golden calf out of all the things they chip in, all the gold they chip in. But he says something interesting. He says, tomorrow we will make a festival to the Lord, that is to Jehovah, the God that they know. So it's like, how is that? What is he thinking? So they're making some carved image, a direct violation of what they're supposed to do. But he says, but we're going to take this, we're going to honor the statue, and they're supposed to represent the true God. And of course, we know what happens with that. Moses absolutely, comes in with a fierce hand, destroys the calf, burns it up. It was a very bad scene in the ancient nation of Israel. So what is so bad about, we can say the old-fashioned three-year-old thing, was like, because God said so. But why do you think God says so? What is so terrible about making a carved image using your judgment, your reasoning, thinking about what we know about God, how it might tie in with this subject matter. What is this fierce admonition, second commandment, if you will, in this nation of Israel, about to not make any carved image of any type, even if it's intended for good to represent him? Why do you think so?
You're putting that carved image first.
Yes.
And you're praying to it instead of the Almighty.
Yeah, so you're putting the carved image potentially above what it's intended to represent, even if it's bad intentions or good intentions. Very good, please.
If anything else, God made the image. You know, and it's almost like we're saying we can do it better or differently. So we are the image of God in a sense. So I don't know, it's almost like we're taking God making a graven image. We're not a graven image, but we are an image of God that He made. And so then for us to go around and make an image of Him is kind of like this just really, we don't really have that authority or that purpose to be doing that. You know?
Yeah. I'll be blunt, what a drastic step down. Here we're taking, where God has fashioned us from the dust of the ground to be His image bearers, and then we're taking other inferior things and trying to do the same thing God's doing. I'm going to argue this in a moment. It's going to defy our very purpose of existence. And one more first, Sterling. Yes.
It's interesting, and think about the context of us being granted to subdue the creation, the earth. And so to me, that means that we take it, we shape it, and we form it according to our plans and what suits us. But we understand that we are over that God is over us, so He is doing the same thing to us, and there's a hierarchy there. So God is forming and shaping us according to His good pleasure and as what suits Him. And then when we try to do that to God, create God in man's own image, which is what all the false gods really are, you know, we're not permitted to take shape a God, you know, that's flipping the narrative there, right? It's God over us, not man over God.
It's totally fouling up the entire order of things. You guys are exactly right. And Sterling was first. And
Let's just say,
everybody.
whatever we choose to make will be flawed representation. So as we've argued in this class before, none of us can capture the totality of God in our minds. So whatever we choose to make will represent some hollow image of a portion of what God is that will lead us to idolatry.
Yeah, absolutely. You got some more things to say about that? Yes.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of confused. Because I don't see anyone like today like making images and where we're like, you know, worshiping Baal and things. So are we talking like art? Like what we call art today, and like sculptures and things that we go in and like somebody who God has given an ability of painting or sculpting and things like that, and like we see, you know, like just, I can't think, but like, you know, Jesus dying and like, you know, being held by Mary or
Sure.
and things like
Sure.
that, but like that's not something we worship, but is that an image, is that?
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, no, let's talk about that for a minute. Since you had a clarification of that, let's talk about that for a minute, because that's actually not what I'm saying. So first of all, we're talking about the Old Testament at first, and we're going to make some application in a moment. But let's get right to the application since you brought it up. So, of course, for them, it was, and I was going to go even take a step back just a moment and back into your question and try to answer the best I can, is that going back to what the gentleman said in the back first, is like, I really do think if we're supposed to be, to make it super clear, if we're supposed to be His image bearers, if that is our very purpose for existence, it's like if we are crafting something, whether it's ancient Israel or us today, and I'm going to suggest what it might be for us today, but anytime before we even get to the what is, whatever we can define what we're crafting, not only would be a hollow image of what the true God is. That's a great point. And I'm going to say even further, it absolutely destroys the very identity we're supposed to have. We are supposed to be His image bearers. And so if we try to make something that bears His image, we're going against our very purpose and identity of being here. We're His image bearers. So we have no right, no authority to make anything that would represent Him, because that's our job. That's us. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be the one bearing and reflecting his image. So if we attempt to do that with anything else, that's terrible. So to answer your question, I think a big part of that would be your intention. You know, I think in theory you could make some version of art or whatever to, if you're trying to make that some carved image to represent God, then yeah, absolutely that would be wrong. But I don't think that's probably what a lot of art is doing. They're trying to, I would think actually, I wasn't going to get into this just yet, but I want to lean into it. I would even tend to say that anytime we do something for the glory of God, as long as we're not violating something he's explicitly stated, that's part of subduing. I think that's part of image bearing. If we're taking something within creation that's laid fallow and doing something and creating something for his glory, as long as it's not in violation of something he told us to do, I think that's part of bearing his image. Taking our very vocation and doing something for his glory is part of bearing his image throughout the world. The theme of this class so far, I hope, has been, with all three teachers, has been not to run from culture, but to run into culture and bear his image. And I'll tell you just a beautiful story that happened to me this past week. I was in Los Angeles, and I'm embarrassed to say, probably not what I would think the bastion of Christianity would exist in Los Angeles. But I'm sitting down across from a gentleman, and I joked about it before, I sell furniture. And we were providing furniture for one of his future facilities. And I know about what it was. It was, supposed to be a facility. He works for a nonprofit, and it was going to house orphans that age out, and people are transitioning out of homelessness. And I wanted to learn more about this guy. He was actually very wealthy. He was in the film industry, and he became quite wealthy. And he quoted by memory this. He just talked about how he believed this was his vocation now, was his responsibility. He spent his first part of his life learning. He said, I spent another part of my life earning. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life returning. And so he took a massive, massive pay cut for what he was doing. And he quoted this passage by memory. And I looked it up after he left there. And it was this. It was Isaiah chapter 58, beginning in verse 6. And he quoted exactly by memory. He said, "Is this not the thing of fasting I have chosen?" He explained to me that in this ancient text, they were talking about going through the motions of being religious. And it said, this is not the kind of fast I wanted. This is the fast I wanted. To loose the chains of the injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, "Here I am." I mean, so I went to Los Angeles to sell furniture, and I got an amazing Bible lesson by a gentleman that I just now met. I mean, he is spending his vocation bringing glory to God by providing shelter to the homeless and the ones that would be homeless. So to me, that is ruling over the earth in my opinion. That is taking what God has done, given us, and fashioning it and shaping it for His glory. So to answer your question, no, I don't. I think if you're making a piece of art for His glory, that's not making a carved image. That's using your talent and your gifts to bring glory to God. But now we can mess that up, right? But I don't think that's what you're talking about. Yes.
I am uncomfortable with denominational churches and cathedrals all over the world that have crucifixes and statues of Mary and the apostles, and that can very easily go from art appreciation into worship.
Absolutely. That's why it's such a careful careful thing when you're making any sort of art, especially when you're bringing it into a religious setting. I would say that for sure. So I want to go back, but you had something to say. I want you to go back to you. You had your hand raised earlier.
Well, I was just going to say the kind of that contrast between images that we make and the fact that we are his images. Is anything that we make is not the living, and it's like if he is the living.
Great point.
God, yeah, and he made us to be his image. We can't create that.
Yeah.
We can be his image or trying as he gives us command to, as we're talking about rule.
That's great. That's great. I guess that's what Romans 1's all about, right? You're serving the creature rather than the creator. Great point. Yeah.
I think a great example of this concept that we're talking about is the bronze serpent that God instructed Moses to make when they're in the wilderness, when they were at the plague of the serpents, and when they looked at it and they healed. God told them specifically to make that. But later on in the Judges, we find that people had been worshiping that. And one of the judges actually destroyed that thing. So the same item, depending on how we're viewing
Great point.
can be perfectly fine or can be an idol.
That's such a, man, I did not have that. I thank you for sharing that. That's a great point. And it deals with what she's talking about. Exactly. I just had I thought of a phrase last night just when I was kind of just thinking about the lesson. And I think this is ultimately what's so dangerous about any idol that we can make in modern society. And I want to address what she was asking earlier, because I think this is the key about like what type of idols we can make. I just want us to always realize that we eventually will reflect the idols that we select. I mean, that's the danger of an idol. And it doesn't have to be, I think in our modern society, it's going to be less likely to be some carved image that we make and fashion with our hands, and much more something intangible that becomes our idol. And we've all talked about these in Bible classes. We all know what they are. Security and money and even good things like family, entertainment or whatever it might be. Those are the things that I think that we can construct today, not physical statues in our modern society, but things that are intangible that can be just as much as an idol, if not more so, because they lie in your heart, rather than just a place. And I got a few hands up. I want you to go first, if you don't mind.
There is a worldview that subscribes to this theory that you don't make any images. It's actually Islam, because it's basically saying these veneration of images is a pathway to idolatry, and so they take that approach. And also for man to make a likeness of something living, only God is the creator, and so there's that concept. But it's built into Islam, so it is part of a very popular worldview. It's just not part of fundamental Christianity.
Great point. Yes, you had something to say too.
So I've known a number of Church of Christ people that have gravitated towards Greek Orthodoxy because of, iconography being kind of an important part of that. Do you think that there is a healthy way to approach that versus saying like any like displayed images of apostles or Mary is deterring from focusing on God?
Interesting question, and I'm gonna come back to that question just a second. We're going to talk about that. Actually, the statement of the class, great point. I've actually known a disproportionate amount of people that shifted to that too. It's interesting you say that. But has all hand up or somewhere else? Yeah, please, ma'am.
Just a simple verse that makes me, because this feels very clear, but it says in Acts 17:29, therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design or skill. So I feel like that clarifies in some ways that if it's a design made by a human, and not different than what you've been saying. I agree with, like I think Brad mentioned, that if it's something he made, or as opposed to something we have made, if we're worshiping that would be the one.
That's a great text about this topic. Excellent topic. I'm gonna come back to that in a moment. I do want to spend just a couple of extra minutes on this idea of idols that we can fashion in our lives, I think that really is something we really, something, let me just rephrase that. It's something I struggle with on a regular basis. And why that becomes so dangerous and why it does become a reflection of what we select. And or what it resembles what we assemble. I mean, you can have a lot of memorable things to kind of say with that, because we do become to resemble what we assemble in our lives. We reflect it. And what I mean by that is, an idol is anything you're putting trust in. We say that sometime about it's what we elevate above God. Absolutely, textbook case. No discussion about that. It's what we elevate above God. But sometimes that's hard in your brain to kind of separate what I'm elevating before God and what's necessary. Well, I've got to go make money, and so it's hard to do that sometimes. But to me, here's an easier test case for me. It's like, what am I placing my trust in? What am I really counting on in life? Am I counting on some version of security that I've accumulated? Or am I counting on some talent that God has given me or somebody in my family? What type of joy is something bringing me? Is it just modern entertainment? Or is it just really just kind of reveling in the goodness of God? I mean, to me, this is real stuff. I mean, this is like real stuff to me. And because it's something like we do every single day. Every day we wake up, we have got to decide, am I going to image God to the world? Am I going to reflect God to the world? Am I going to am I going to represent him to the world by how everything I act? And then all those gray areas in my judgment just completely vanish about like what I should do or what I shouldn't do. If the question is always, is this going to like represent God to the world, or is it going to be a distortion to God to the world? Man, then all of a sudden your life just changes at that point. And any time I fail, it's because I failed to really internalize those questions and answers in my own brain. And so, another good question to ask yourself maybe today is almost to flip it about like, what brings me pleasure, and almost flip it as like, what brings me fear. That's another way to look at evaluate things in your life, whether they have a disproportionate value. So here's what I mean by that. So think sometimes, what is your greatest fear? Not what I'm just putting my trust in, but what is my greatest fear? Like so for example, if my greatest fear is to go bankrupt, then that might tell you what your idol is. Here's a tough one. If my greatest fear is to lose one of my children, as tragic as that it would be. I mean, I'm going to talk about the embodiment of tragedy. Or pity for that for anybody that's happened to. But if that is if that's our greatest fear, there might be something out of order in our lives. And I'm saying these things because it's something I wrestle with. I'm not preaching to you, I can tell you that. I'm talking to myself as much as I am you. But it is something we need to think through. It's like, what brings me the ultimate joy? That's the thought. What's my ultimate fear in all of this? And I'm afraid what we're going to have to do is I want to give your question some more thought, and maybe think through it next Sunday if I could. I want to answer that carefully because I think it's a great question. But because I do want to spend the last 10 minutes or so. I'm the worst manager of time in the country, and so I do want to talk about I think a culmination of this topic, and that is, of course, ultimately how we know anything of how to do things right. It is to look at God's Son. It is to look at Jesus, because we know the passages. We won't take time to look at them for the sake of time, but Colossians 1:15, we know it. He is the image of what? The invisible God. Think about what that's saying. He is the ultimate image of God. If you've seen me, what does he say? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Because on that Colossians 1:15, he says, because all things are made by him, for him, and through him. Without him, nothing was made. I mean, God used the pre-incarnate Jesus, the Logos, to create the world. He just spoke it into existence. And so he comes to this earth and finally ultimately images what really God is. So if we want to know how to rule the world in God's way and how to subdue the world in God's way, it has to be principle-based. I think that answers part of the question that was asked earlier about how to incorporate some of these things or not incorporate them, is to really think deeply about Jesus. How did he do it? How did he rule the world? He ruled the world through sacrificial love and service. That's how he subdued the world. Just through total and complete sacrifice. Think about that. We had that Colossians 1:15, at least in my circles, have been the most popular verse to go to. But Hebrews 1 is the same way. Most versions say, in verse 3 says, he was the exact representation of the invisible God. He represented God exactly. So Jesus came to solve all these questions for mankind for all time. If you really want to know what God is like, if you really want to know what he looks like, in air quotes, look at Jesus. Look what he did. Look who he spent time with. Look how he started his ministry. He opened up the scroll of Isaiah in chapter 61, and Luke 4, and he just read those phenomenal, memorable verses about setting the oppressed free and giving sight to the blind and making the deaf hear. I mean, that's a reflection of God. So do think about what Jesus did. He was the ultimate image of God. And what does Paul talk about what our entire purpose is in Romans chapter 8? Our whole purpose is to let God shape us into here's the word again, the image of Jesus. That's it. So I do want to think about like who he spent time with in just the last few minutes of class. When you think about Jesus' life, who did he spend the most time with? Who was his ministry to?
The sinners.
The sinners.
Didn't follow him.
The sinners. And what socioeconomic class were most of the people that he spent time with? So Jesus was born in this class society. When he was already kind of, if you had the apex triangle, he was already toward the bottom. And this artisan, his father was a carpenter, and yet he was already born in this lower class of economics, and yet he went further down to spend time with people. He spent time with his people, his class of people, the fishermen, the craftsmen, and then yet he spent even more time with the people under him. The prostitutes, the people that were lepers, the people that were infirmed. That's ruling the world to Jesus. I mean, think about that last message that he was trying to send his 12 apostles before his crucifixion. What does he do? We all know it. We've all been in Bible class most of our lives, most of us in this room. And we just, if you're like me, sometimes you let these stories just kind of wash over you too quickly. But what does he do before he goes to the cross? He gets on his hands and knees, and he gets a bowl of water and a towel, and he washes the feet of the people that were supposed to be serving him. He was the rabbi. He was the teacher. And he gets on his hands and knees, and he washes their feet as an example. Like, this is how you're supposed to end. This is how you're supposed to do your life. Just serve and wash feet. It is the most backward way of thinking from the world standpoint, right? It absolutely turns the world either upside down or right side up, depending on your perspective and all of that. So That is to me our mission. There is to image God to the world, to represent Him, and how we know how to do it. The only way we know how to do it is to try to be more like Jesus every day. And I'm just going to refer to you. I mean, I think we've had all our sermons are so good here, to be honest with you. I mean, they're just so good. But the last 5 about just the way of Jesus, just go back and listen to them again. Because that's how you image God to the world, is to emulate what was talked about in those last 4 or 5 sermons on Sunday. Anything else about this as we end? Yeah.
I was just going to say back to Acts 17 that Myra brought up a little further up. It talks about, it's talking about God, and it says, neither is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives everyone life and breath in all things. So idols need you to give to them. And God gives. I mean, as you're talking about with sacrificial giving of his time and his effort and his energy and washing his disciples' feet. And when we live in the hope of Jesus, we know we can't do anything to earn our salvation. And we live in that peace, knowing that we love God and we believe in God and what his message is through Jesus, that we have that eternal hope and peace. And so I just think that's such an interesting contrast, because with idols, any of them, you have to continually feed them. You have to give them your energy, your time, your effort. And with God, there's nothing you can do, you know? He's done it all.
And ironically, they give nothing back. And so, because they're dead. And yet, dumb people like me go back and
try to give you energy to something that don't give you either. So
that's a great point. Yeah, Sterling, we can.
Opposite of that is that God instead feeds us. It's an idol, the one that takes. God is the God who gives life, so he feeds us.
Yeah, that's great. Please.
I think first important is priority. Working hard is no problem, and earning money, no problem. Pursue for more degrees, no problem. But the problem is if we put all of these things above God, and these things could become idols to us. And for me, I think I need to remind myself and always put God above all things, even the things look good. And if the things they are good, they are right. But for me, I realize if I put all of this above God, I'm going to lose joy.
Yeah, that's such a great way to end class. You said it perfectly. Thank you so much for everything. Appreciate you.
You're in his presence. You have hope for eternal life. You know what I mean? It just gives you that overwhelming sense of peace instead of, am I wrong, am I right, am I wrong, am I right, sort of thing.
Yeah, hope and security were mentioned previously with regard to the sovereignty of God. I think also plays a huge role here. That if we have a personal God, we have a sense of hope and security. And this is something that we need to work on as well. We don't have enough sense of security among our ranks. We need to figure out what it is that's missing in us that keeps us scared right up to the end of our lives, not knowing what kind of relationship that we have with God. If you struggle with that, I have some hints for you. Please feel free to talk to me. I would say I can solve the problem. I can help you. Because I've seen it happen way too many times on deathbeds. People scared to death of what comes after death for them, after they've been Christians for their entire life. That shouldn't be the case. Relationship with a personal God saves us, and I know a lot of scientists who are determinists. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. It's a result of the chemistry and the physics. Okay? A personal God rescues us from cold determinism. There's nothing more hopeless. And if we have a personal God, we see value in the individual. Everybody has value, no matter how much we disagree with them.
That's Paul's point in the 1 Corinthians letter. We're all of value. And like you said, that's from the top. There was value among the three of them, continually, everything we know about them.
The problem with the Corinthians was they could see their own value. They couldn't see the value of the brothers and sisters around them, right? So it's like, yeah, I have value. Let me show you all the ways I'm valuable. I elevate myself through these ways of different ways of showing that I have value. And in order to do that, I got to step on other people and push them down. They don't have as much value as I have. So it's not just an ability to see value in ourselves, but in other people. He takes a particular interest in the oppressed, this is another area where we could use some work. And I don't mean that none of you do take an interest in the oppressed, but God, throughout Scripture, puts a lot of emphasis on helping people who are oppressed. And we need to give more attention to that, because God does. Because we see value in the individual, dignity is imparted to every person there. They are owed a certain amount of dignity simply because they're God's creatures and bear His image, no matter how badly they've distorted it, or no matter how badly I've distorted it. And it affects the way we see the historical narrative. The Bible history is the playing out of God's love towards a people for His own possession, a people who bear His name and gather in His place. And of course, as we go from the Old Testament to the New Testament, we go from the place, Jerusalem, to the place that Jesus mentions when He said that the day is coming, and now is, that those who worship Him will not worship Him in this place or that place, but in spirit and truth. Those are now the place where God is worshipped. They replaced Jerusalem and Gerizim, spirit and truth. Okay, what else you got? I think we've got maybe 2 minutes left.
Darrell,
Back here, Floyd.
I think it's interesting to think that, this knowing God isn't something we would call an achievement. It's more of a journey that typifies our life. And even Paul, who knew God more than most, in Philippians chapter 3, talking about he hasn't attained, he's pressing on to the goal. He wants to know God and the power of His resurrection, the fellowship of His sufferings. Paul, he knew God better than any of us had hoped to, but that was still his ambition. Was to, so it's a journey in life to continually know God and be draw closer to Him in those things.
Quite right. It's a lifetime project, and I'm so thankful that I wasn't supposed to be born with complete knowledge of God, and that I've had to develop and will continue to develop if I continue to care about it, about who God is. Yes.
The only other thing I would say, whatever we put at the top has to have the strength to be at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put something at the top that doesn't have the strength to bear everything else, you lose it.
Mm-hmm.
So you put your kids at the top, you'll lose your kids. Put your family at the top, you lose your family.
Very good. Anybody else? A final comment? I think we probably have seconds left. Very good. Thank you for your help and attention.